This is the You Can Learn Chinese podcast. For everyone who's trying to learn Chinese or reaching for the next level, you came to the right place. I am your host, Jared Turner, and life is full of complications. Even when you're born, there's a string attached. My co-host is John Passon, and he can't remember the last time he heard a good Alzheimer's joke. John's out this week, but I'm sure you're going to enjoy this interview with Mike Kennedy. Let's get to it.
Hi, so I'm Mike Kennedy. I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, and I now live in Charleston, South Carolina. I'm the co-founder of a web app for helping Chinese learners called Jinbu Pal, and I've been learning Chinese for about 5.5 years now. And then I also run a YouTube channel where I make cocktails in Chinese.
Oh, wow. Okay. All right, Mike, why did you start learning Chinese?
You know, it's interesting. In 2017, myself and a coworker, we were trying to just design a product on our own. And we started designing this type of computer keyboard. And we got to the phase where we were looking for manufacturers. And I was in Hong Kong on a trip with some friends just for fun. And I spent some time in college in London and I loved it there. And so the similarities with the British influence in Hong Kong, it just felt like this Chinese version of London. And I was just like, really enjoyed it. I thought that it was so cool. So being that time period where we were already looking for manufacturers in China and being there on vacation, I heard this podcast from Tim Ferriss talking about how he learned Chinese and this kind of data-driven approach to language learning. And I thought, you know, I have some free time right now with some downtime in developing this product. I was like, I might just try to learn some Chinese and just see how it works out. And if anything else, I'll learn something and it'll be fun. And so I just got started doing it and just never stopped. It was just so enjoyable.
Really? Okay. So when was this?
That was in 2017, fall of 2017.
How did that go? I mean, how did you start learning at that point? Say, okay, this is interesting. Maybe it might be helping me, but like, what did you do to get going?
I think the first thing that I did was I just started Googling for the highest frequency characters and words in Chinese. And I just started working from that list by itself, even just the characters in isolation, which I know isn't, you know, the best way to always start, but it worked for me because I was just trying to get as much recognition of characters as quickly as I possibly could. So I just kind of went through that and hacked together with different products. And I wasn't really happy with any of the available products on the market. You know, I did a little Duolingo here and there, but I kind of ended up hacking together a lot of the approach that I was using and using Pleco in combination with that list of high frequency characters and words.
I can understand. I've talked to other learners who've been a bit of a similar experience like that. Oh, hey, you know, I'm just going to hacking something together, just figuring it out, right? That is difficult. It's a lot of work and, you know, and challenging. What do you think was really kind of driving you along? You know, you talked about, hey, oh yeah, maybe Chinese is interesting and stuff, maybe might help my career. But what do you think really kind of carried you through some of this more challenging beginning stage and even further on?
Well, I would say I started out just really believing or just trusting in the process that, hey, if I can just get to where I recognize about 80% of what I'm reading, then that's the point where it really starts to get harder because you kind of start reaching diminishing returns. But I received so much positive feedback at that point already that it was really hard to feel like the challenging part was made it worth giving up or slowing down because I felt like I'd just gotten so much good feedback already. So I would say in that first period of 6 to 8 months of learning, I was already recognizing, you know, I forget exactly how much, but maybe about 800 of the most common characters. And during that time, this was in the recommendations from that Tim Ferriss podcast that I listened to. I bought an autobiography of Bob Dylan in simplified Chinese. And I would study those characters and then I would open that book up to just a random page and just try to sound out as many characters as I knew and just try to make a guess at what the sentence meant, even though I only really knew the characters mainly in isolation and not the actual bigram words and their meanings. And so because of that, from the very start, everything that I was doing was in some sort of context of like a real native text. So it gave me a lot of confidence, even if I wasn't understanding the majority of what I was actually reading. It helped so that as I gained more and more understanding of different meanings, pronunciations of characters and words, I was always coming back to that real content. And because of that, I actually ended up getting a better ability to discuss, say, engineering topics. I'm an engineer. Or I remember having pretty early on a conversation with a cab driver about self-driving cars and a new Tesla factory that was opening up. But checking into a hotel, I had a lot of trouble with. So because I got such positive feedback from those sort of conversations, when something that would be more of your traditional conversation that you might learn in a textbook, when I would fail at doing that, it actually wasn't as devastating because I already had so many positive experiences to look back on.
Oh, that's really interesting, because I know that can be a difficult road. It's not one
Definitely.
we usually recommend. I know people, they try that, hey, well, let's get some, I had a guy forever ago when I was in China after a few years, and he had a biography of Jack Welch, the former CEO of GE. And I was like, oh, yeah, that's going to spend an hour going through one page. But it sounds like it's something that kind of worked for you. Why do you think maybe that worked for you as opposed to maybe going through some more easier content or learner material?
I think the reason it worked for me was just because I was interested in what I was reading. I only found content that I was interested in, and that's all that I read. I never enjoyed novels growing up. And so that's why I would go for, news articles about self-driving cars or whatever it was that I was interested in that moment. I would just find an article that was in Chinese related to it. And just, I would say more so than reading the article, I was familiarizing myself with it. So I would, like I said, going through and pronouncing, and it just made it feel a lot more casual as I started to get better and better at it, because it all started from always coming back to some sort of real text. So I really think it was just finding something that I really, really enjoyed.
Well, you're talking a lot about learning characters and, reading, studying for a year and a half in the United States. Sounds like you're focusing pretty heavy on characters and reading and such. Why?
Yeah, so it was just mainly for the interest in working on that keyboard device, but not too long into that, I had my partner who I was working on that with. I just kind of realized over time he wasn't as dedicated to it in the same way that I was. And so we stopped working on that. So the initial goal was that I'd be able to talk with manufacturers when we were going over there. And with not having that project going on anymore, and it was something that I was working on and interested in, well, I'll just keep doing this because I had a lot more free time and I was enjoying doing it. And actually, a few months prior to going to China at that point, that's when my friend and I started Jinbu Pal. So then it kind of became, one, I was really enjoying it. And two, we were working on this app for Chinese learners, and it made me want to spend even more time with my studying.
So tell me now then about this trip to China. How'd this come about? Maybe you can tell me about it.
Yeah, so I had just been wanting to get some opportunities to practice my Chinese more and just go experience the culture. And I had a college friend who was interested in going too. So just planned a trip and went to Beijing, Chengdu, Shenzhen, and Shanghai. And it was a lot of fun because I got to experience, just having conversations with a lot of people while I was there. And it was just a really fun experience.
What was that like, Mike? Because I've talked to a lot of individuals that you're studying, you're in the States, you're speaking English predominantly in your everyday life, and then now you're to China and you're hitting smack in the face with Chinese, so to speak. Yeah. How did you find what you had studied at that point? How was that to help you, actually survive and converse and function there?
Yeah, I would say that kind of in keeping with what I was saying earlier with the way that I was studying, a lot of the survival Chinese was a lot more difficult. And where I could really enjoy it the most was just when we had an extended period of time, like we had a private driver to take us to the Great Wall. And so we had a period of time in the car where we were having a long conversation. And that's where it was really the most enjoyable because I got to talk about, more complex topics than the just survival language. But I definitely found that the survival part was pretty difficult because you'd end up with a lot less context. So when you say something to somebody and you're expecting back a one sentence answer, you have to fully understand what they're saying and respond back. That's the really challenging part. Versus if somebody responds to you with a paragraph, you can kind of figure out more of the meaning despite not having as good of a listening skill. It was very challenging, but it was a fun challenge.
Yeah, that's something I've always noted about the challenge of phrase books. great. You can ask the question. Can you understand the response?
Yeah. And, actually, now that you mentioned that, I know you guys did an episode recently about using ChatGPT for producing some content to help you practice. I actually started doing that recently for that exact same purpose. I went on another trip to China just 2 months ago. And when I came back, I discovered the feature on ChatGPT where you can actually speak to it with a microphone. And I started coming up with all these sort of games that I would play with it, like role playing, you work at a hotel and I'm going to try to check into the hotel. And I want you to, no matter what, you're not going to let me check into the hotel. And I want you to come up with every reason you can think of, my credit card's being declined, all of these sort of things. And it was really helpful. It was really cool because then you can go back in the future and you could say, hey, I want to play that game again. And you could ask for a summary and it would tell you how you did and how many times you played. And it was pretty cool. And it's really only limited to what you can think of are the challenges that you're experiencing. And you just kind of come up with a little game that might help you with that.
That sounds like a pretty cool idea. So yeah, this China trip then. So you were there for how long?
That first one was 2 weeks.
Okay. So you covered a lot of ground in 2 weeks. Probably spent most of your time on trains and planes.
Yeah.
Well, that's really interesting. So I want to know, though, a little bit more like kind of your everyday life or something. I know you've developed this app, but outside of that, it sounds like it's something you've been really passionate about. And what are some things you've done to kind of develop and further your Chinese skills while you're not in a Chinese speaking environment?
Yeah. So I don't know. I've taken a real interest in lots of like Chinese movies, popular songs. There's a hot pot restaurant actually not far from where I live in Charleston, and they have a big stage. It's like a hot pot restaurant, but they also have karaoke, but it's not like in a private room. It's like up on a stage. And so it's been fun a few times. I'll go with friends there and do, one of my favorite Chinese songs. It's been something that I just really enjoy, and it's always a challenge. And so that's one of the things that's fun about it, is to just keep coming back and learning more, but also just experiencing the cultural aspect of it. I've probably watched 50 or more different Chinese movies, and I just always enjoy learning more and more.
So, Mike, I also understand that you've gone to China, to Asia there a number of times. Maybe you could talk about some of those trips you've been doing.
Yeah. So I went last year for 3 weeks, just totally on my own to Taipei. And part of that was working with some universities and language schools to promote Jinbu Pal. That was a lot of fun to go experience that. So as I mentioned, I have my YouTube channel where I make cocktails in Chinese. I'm really interested in home bartending, but I've never worked in a bar, but I have quite a lot of knowledge from doing this all the time. So when I was in Taipei, I knew that Taipei was really popular for a lot of these highly acclaimed cocktail bars. So I would go to a lot of them. And particularly, I liked to go on nights where there weren't that many people there.
Mm-hmm.
Like Friday and Saturday nights were actually my least favorite night because it was hard to get a seat. I couldn't sit at the bar and talk with the bartenders and really ask them questions about their recipes and what they were doing. But I would go there on these Monday nights or whatever. And it was just a lot of fun to experience talking with people about what they were interested in, what I was interested in. And there's one time that I thought was pretty cool from that trip where there was a karaoke bar in Taipei. Before I went, I asked some people on Reddit, where can I go sing karaoke in Taipei, but not in like a private room, like somewhere where they have a stage.
Yeah, like an open mic or something, right?
Exactly. And so I got a few recommendations of some places. So I went to this one spot and I went to the bar and sat down and had a drink. And then I said, hey, I heard this is where I can sing some Chinese songs. So I want to sing a song. And they were like, oh, we really only want people to sing American songs here. We're not really interested in Chinese songs. I was like, oh, because I wanted to sing this, I think it's from the 90s song by David Tao called 小贱的姑娘 or 小贱姑娘. And I requested, I was like, I want to sing this song. And so then the DJ was also the owner of the place. He was like, okay, I'll play it. So then I got up and sang the song, and kind of everybody in the bar stopped what they were doing, and everybody was watching me, and they're shooting a video of it and all of this sort of stuff. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention before that started, one of the reasons he said we can't do it is I have this issue where the Chinese characters show up too small on the screen. So you can only do the English ones. I was like, oh no, I know all the words. It's fine. And he was like, really? Yeah. He kind of almost felt like he had to do it at that point. Because he was like, do you really know all the words to the song? So then in the end, he posted it on the social media and said, I forget exactly what. So the refrain in the chorus of the song is booming by, booming by. So he said multiple times in his response on the video, like, well, yeah, booming by. I also don't understand, how do you sing Chinese songs so well? I don't understand why I hadn't even drank that much and I still played Chinese music when I tell myself I'm never going to play Chinese music here.
So framing this up, this is a bar in Taiwan with Chinese people singing English songs, and you are a English speaker showing up and singing a Chinese song. So yeah, it sounds like...
Exactly. Well, that was a pretty cool experience. And I think that was actually my second night there. So then I posted that on my social media too, and all of my friends back in the States were like, just thought it was pretty funny that I'd literally just gotten there and already was getting posted on social media and stuff like that.
Well, that's hilarious. That sounds like a great experience.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Now, Mike, you mentioned that you have a YouTube channel about making cocktails in Chinese. Tell me about this. I mean, it's one thing. Okay, maybe I can make a YouTube channel about making cocktails, but in Chinese, maybe you could talk about this. How did this all come about?
Yeah, so the idea for it just came about because I noticed that there's a whole lot of content out there if you're looking for English content on cocktails. I actually was listening to a lot of this Chinese content because, as I mentioned, I'm always trying to look for content that I'm interested in. So if I want to look up a video about some cocktail technique, I'll usually just go try to find a Chinese version of that video. And I started noticing this pattern that for the English videos, there was a lot of, here's this classic cocktail and I'm going to show you how to make it, tell you maybe a little bit about the history about it, and give you some tasting notes. But all of the ones for Asia that I found, they were based more on we're going to do some challenge today, or we're going to go do a review of this particular bar. But there seemed to be a whole category of content that was being made in English that wasn't in Chinese. And the other thing that I thought was that because it tended to be content where you're doing kind of the same thing over and over again, I thought it would be really helpful to practice learning that specific vocabulary for making cocktails. And it would be relatively approachable for somebody who's not, quote unquote, fully fluent, at a native level in the language to be able to make videos and write scripts for that sort of content. So that's why I decided to do it, and not to mention just having a huge interest in home bartending.
So is this something you script out then, or are you just going it ad hoc with maybe a little bit of prep? How does that work?
Yeah, so I'll usually script out the beginning parts of the video and do kind of a teleprompter for the information that I have, kind of the background behind the drink and any of that related stuff. And then actually making the drink and doing all the tasting notes, I do that more kind of on the fly.
Wow, that's pretty cool. That's really interesting.
It's been a lot of fun to do, and I'm looking forward to, just continuing to do that more and more this year, because I've gotten a lot of positive responses, even with early videos. There's lots of comments in Chinese, people wanting more of, we want more of you using, whiskey sour type variations or, whatever it might be. So I'm getting a lot of feedback and really interested to keep going with it.
Now, Mike, I know one of the original reasons you had started studying Chinese was, hey, you wanted to be able to use it in business, to have any discussion. So did that ever happen? Or has it just been a continual personal interest matter?
Yeah. So, when I went on that first trip to China, my friend, he was really interested in technology. And that was one of the reasons we went to Shenzhen, is because he was wanting to kind of see if he could negotiate over some tech products and stuff there's like an Apple phone, like a trading center where there's, tons and tons of iPhones that you can buy, secondhand markets really of electronics. So we would go through and haggle with people on prices and stuff. And any new Chinese learner, or most new Chinese learners, have the experience of, even if you just open your mouth and barely say anything, it's not uncommon for people to be like, wow, your Chinese is so good.
Yeah. Ni hao. Oh, your Chinese is so good.
Yeah, exactly. But in this experience, it was kind of fun because it started with us negotiating over these products. And, there were multiple people in this little storefront that we were in. And we were talking with this one guy, but everybody else in the store was hearing what we were saying. And he would come back and say, he wanted this lower price. And I would tell the the main guy, and everybody would laugh and be like, get out of here. So it was very, not antagonistic, but, we were kind of going back and forth over this negotiation. And finally, once we agreed upon the price, he just said to me, 你的中文还可以, which I thought was strangely, it felt like even more of a compliment than anybody saying like your Chinese is so good. Like just being like, after this whole thing and kind of going back and forth, just being like, you know what, your Chinese is like, okay, it's all right.
Yeah. It's all right. It's good.
Yeah. It was just kind of like a mutual respect that felt.
It's a little more genuine than like really good. Cause exactly. It's not really good. Come on, man.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that was good to get kind of that experience of a little bit of the not quite business side, but that negotiation was a lot of fun.
Yeah. I think they say is in the end, your Chinese, it's never good. It's just, it's okay. I speak a little Chinese. Just speak a little bit, right? That's funny. Well, Mike, I'm curious, looking back on your experience learning Chinese, having time to reflect on that, how has Chinese impacted your life?
It's definitely had a pretty big impact to the extent of, setting up Jinbu Pal with my friend and running that for several years now. And just being so interested in it that it's like I'm going on all these trips, having gone to Asia multiple times to practice my Chinese. It's definitely had a big impact in that regard that I go to places and meet so many people that I wouldn't meet otherwise. I've made a lot of friends from going on trips to Asia as well. I never would have imagined 6 years ago that I'd be making cocktails in Chinese. It seems like it's taken me so many different places and also just opened up my interest in language learning in general and has caused me to be interested in learning Cantonese. And I have an upcoming trip to Japan and I've been working on some Japanese as well. I think it's just given me some confidence that you can learn challenging languages to the extent to where you can communicate and make friends and just have a good time meeting new people and experiencing new things. And so it's really opened up my thoughts on the power of learning languages and the experiences that you can get from doing that.
Now, I understand you're also learning Cantonese. Maybe you could talk about that. I mean, why did you decide to start learning this as well? And how has, learning Mandarin, how's that helped you learn Cantonese?
Yeah, so I forget at what point it was, but I started coming across some YouTube videos of kind of like the xiaoma sort of thing with people going around and speaking Cantonese as well. And it just looked kind of interesting. So similar to, looking into learning Mandarin, I just started diving in a little bit and noticing that, a lot of the time when I've spoken to native speakers of Cantonese, their first response is, wow, it must be so difficult to learn Cantonese because we use just so much slang. But then once I really dove into the data and the details on it and really trying to figure out, how much of it is slang and how much of it is different, I found that it was actually a lot more approachable than I would have thought it was. So again, it was just a fun challenge to do that. And I found that with working on Jinbu Pal, I thought it could be an interesting idea to use what we'd already built for Jinbu Pal to try to study Cantonese as well. And I thought that would also give me a kind of a fresh approach to using our app to learn from the early stages, because by the time we got to the point of designing Jinbu Pal, I was making the app to recreate the kind of hacked together version that I was using to study initially, but I was already kind of beyond that point with my Mandarin. So that's one of the reasons that motivated me doing it. And it was just a lot of fun. I was able to find so much cool content. Actually, like Disney has produced tons of content that has Cantonese audio. Like you can find probably like the first 10 seasons of The Simpsons, you can find them all in Cantonese on Disney Plus. And I'm a big Simpsons fan. So I was like, oh, this is really cool. And you start to notice that there's quite a lot of similarities in pronunciation in a lot of characters. And then the ones that are different, you can find just patterns between their pronunciation in Mandarin versus Cantonese. And doing that over time, you just start to pick up the pronunciation. And when you're getting more and more content that you're exposed to, it starts to come to you a little bit easier. It's a lot easier than I would have thought it would be when I first started doing it. So I kind of approached it as an experiment, and then I just enjoyed doing it and kept going with it.
Well, there you go. Well, Mike, what advice would you give to someone who's learning Chinese right now?
Yeah, so I would say some of the best experiences I've had have been when you're able to talk with somebody about something that they also enjoy. So it's not just the fact that you're speaking in Chinese, but you're talking about something that both of you find really interesting. And so that's the importance of finding that content that you really enjoy. And so I have kind of a story behind that is when I was in Taipei and I went to one of these bars, I was talking to the bartender there and asking him a bunch of kind of detailed questions about this drink he was making me. And he said, how are you able to speak about cocktails in this way? And I was like, oh, well, I've been kind of working on my vocabulary for cocktails because I'm interested in starting this YouTube channel. And I spend a lot of my free time watching this very popular for bartending in Taiwan. There's a YouTube channel called Stupid Bar. And I was like, I've been watching a lot of Stupid Bar because of my interest in cocktails. And he said, wait a second. He said, so you're from Charleston, South Carolina, and in your free time, you watch Stupid Bar. And I was like, yeah. And he was like, cool. He was like, I never would have imagined anybody in the States have even heard of our YouTube channel or this popular YouTube channel locally here. So jump forward a few days, I went to another place where I had met a lot of the people that worked there. And this guy walks in with this really distinctive haircut. And I'm talking to these two people sitting next to me at the bar. And I said, that guy who just walked in, that's one of the most famous bartenders in Japan. And they were like, no, I don't think you know what you're talking about. Little did I know one of these people I'm talking to, he was one of the bartenders at this bar that I was at. And he was just off shift. He was just there hanging out. And he was like, no, I'm pretty sure you don't know what you're talking about. And as I'm talking with them about it, the manager comes over to refill my water and she overhears us and she goes, yeah, that's him. And I was like, and then they were both like, wow, I can't believe you knew who that was. So then she tells me he's actually doing this guest event, like a guest bartending shift in 2 nights at this other place. And I was like, oh, that's cool. I'm going to try to go to it. So later that night, I tried to get a reservation to go to this. And it turned out it was fully booked. And I was like, I'm not going to be able to go. But I figured, you know what? I'll just show up. I knew they had a separate room in the front where it's kind of like 2 different areas. It was like, maybe I can go and just be there. So I show up at that event and who do I see but this bar manager? And she sees me and she's like, Mike, how's it going? She was like, are you able to attend the event? Did you get a ticket or a seat? And I was like, no, it's fully booked. And she said, well, you can come and sit down with, me and all of my friends. And I was like, thank you so much. So now I sit down at this table with all these people who work at these acclaimed bars. These are like ranked the top 50 in the entire world places. So it'd be like, going to one of the best restaurants in the world. That's how these ranking lists sort of work. And that night, I met all of these people, including Uena-san, this Japanese bartender who was there, the owners of multiple of these other places. And the owner of the bar actually even came over and poured a round of drinks for all of us and said, cheers to Mike here. But then after all of that, who was there but Brandon, the guy from Stupid Bar? So I also met him and got, a picture with him and he posted on his social media, like, who would have thought that Stupid Bar has gone global, but apparently we have, some American fans. That was just a cool experience from that. And it just went to show how when you are able to converse with people in something that they're interested in as much as you, people take a notice of that and it makes a big difference. So whatever it is that you're interested in, I would recommend just finding that sort of content and really getting some experience being able to converse in that topic. And if what you're interested in, you think it'll be difficult to find people who you can converse in that topic, just start with popular Chinese movies and TV shows, even going back to the early 90s or the 80s. And you can talk with people who are always going to enjoy reminiscing about some of their favorite movies. And I've had other experiences, sitting down with restaurant owners and talking with them about their favorite movies. And they just keep waving over the waiter to bring more and more food while we're just talking about it. So you can never go wrong doing that. And it will just give you so many positive experiences with your learning.
Well, that's great. I think that's some really good advice. So Mike, if people want to find out a little bit more about what you're doing, where can they go?
So you can find us at jinbupal.com. That's like Jinbu, like to progress, just spelled in pinyin, jinbupal.com. We also have a YouTube channel for Jinbu Pal. On Instagram, it's also Jinbu Pal. And then my YouTube channel is called 居家调酒之路, kind of like the road to home bartending. The English name, you can also search by the English name. That's Home Bartending Journey. And you can also find my cocktail stuff on Instagram under just the pinyin 调酒之路.
Well, we'll go ahead and put a link in the show notes. So if anybody wants to find that, they know where to go.
Perfect. Thanks.
Well, Mike, hey, thanks so much for taking the time to share your story with us. We really appreciate it. It sounds like you're doing a lot of interesting and fun things.
Well, thanks so much for having me on. I've listened to every one of these episodes, and I'm think that you guys are just doing such an amazing thing for the Chinese language learning community with this podcast and sharing so many techniques. And then obviously with the Mandarin Companion graded readers, it's just so much amazing stuff that you're doing. And it's been a real help to me through my journey as well. So I really appreciate you having me on.
You have been listening to the You Can Learn Chinese podcast. My name is Jared Turner, co-founder of the Mandarin Companion Graded Reader Series. My co-host is John Pasden, co-founder of Mandarin Companion, founder of All Set Learning, the Chinese Grammar Wiki, and sinosplice.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe. Take a moment to text or message this episode to a friend or share it on social media. It really helps us to reach more people on their language journey. You can leave us a review, please do, on iTunes or reach out to us at mandarincompanion.com or find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. You can find our Chinese Graded Reader series on Amazon, iBooks, Google Play, or wherever you find your books. Apologies to John Cena, we just ran out of time. The You Can Learn Chinese podcast is produced by myself, Jared Turner, and our editor is Jasper Chua. And a special thanks to my co-host, the man, the myth, the legend, John Pasden. See you next time.